What's up, coders? My name is Dan. Today we'll take a look at GraphQL API development. Now this will not be a tutorial, rather we will just discuss some key topics on GraphQL API development. Now let's get started. First up, let's talk about Schema and TypeDefs. I will give a short description for each type and then I will follow it up with an example. Alright, for the first one, type object. It looks like the usual object. It has a name and a set of fields. Now let's look at our example. You start your object with the keyword type, followed by the name of the object. The set of fields is enclosed in curly braces. Now for the fields, the field name is followed by the colon and the data type right after. You may also have an object within any object. For this example, we have type country followed by a type food. Now you will notice that food has a field origin, which is a type country. This is referencing our object here. So that's basically how you do it. Next type is scalar. In GraphQL, you have your built-in scalar types like string, integer, ID, and others. But aside from the built-in ones, you may also define custom scalar type. You start it up with a scalar keyword, followed by the type, which is in our example is date. And right after that, you can use your date type anywhere in the schema. Now next, type enumeration. This is used for types that could either be one of the things that listed. For our example, start with enum, followed by the name. Now inside our curly braces is not the set of fields, but list of categories where the data might fall under. Now for our last type, or types, we'll talk about query and mutation. Query and mutation are root types that you will be using for your resolvers. In our example, we have a type query. It has a name, followed by a parenthesis where it encloses our parameters. Now in the parameters, it also has a certain number of fields. Now for our example, we only have one. The field has a name and also a type. Then after the arguments, it is followed by a colon and the return type of the query. Now let's move on to our next topic, resolvers. I will discuss the resolver's function signature. A resolver accepts 4 optional parameters, namely parent, args, context, and info. Now parent is the result from the previous or parent type. Args or arguments is the arguments provided to the field. Like for our example earlier, we have a query food and args is the name, which is a type of string. Context is a mutable object that is provided to all resolvers. Now the description says that it's mutable, but it's advisable not to tamper with this object since this will be accessible to all resolvers and changing it will make it harder to keep track of the object, so better not touch it. Info is a field-specific information relevant to the query. This object is rarely used, so let's save the discussion for some other time. Let's take a look at examples. Let's take a look at an example here. Now you write your resolvers. You start with an object query. Now inside the object, we write our resolver name. Now inside this parenthesis are the 4 optional parameters we are talking about. We have the parent. We have the argument, which we destructured in here in this part. have the context and the info. Now here we use context to connect to our DB so we can find food that we are looking for. We use our argument ID as our search parameter. Now next topic is Apollo server. Now, Apollo server is a GraphQL server for Express, Koa, Happy, Lambda, and more frameworks in Node.js. Now we will take a look at the quick start code. This one is posted in Apollo server website, but I just modified it to follow ES6 format, and this is for Express framework. Now if you want to try this, you can go ahead and check out Apollo's website and look for the quick start for the language that you are using. Next thing we are talking about is authentication in GraphQL. Now this is how your schema would look like. We have here auth data. It has three fields, namely user ID, token, and expiration. Now you will notice an exclamation mark at the end of our types here. This signifies that this field is required. So whenever you define an object with the type auth data, it should always have a user ID, a token, and an expiration. Next one here is type query. We have here login. Now this is our root object for our queries. And we have a query here called login. It accepts two parameters. We have email and password. Again, these are required parameters. So every time the client calls the login query, it should always have an email and a password. And then it will return auth data or object here. And again, it is required. For our resolver, we are using JSON Web Token. So first, we will import our user model and import JSON Web Token. Now inside our resolver, what we want to do is first validate the user who is trying to log in. And if that user passes our validation, we will give them the token that they will need to enable to sign into our application. Now, in here, I want to first check if the user exists. So I'm getting the user from our database using his email provided in the login query. And if the user is not existing in our database, we will throw an error saying user doesn't exist. But if the user does exist, we will then check the password if the password is correct. So if not, we will throw an error saying incorrect password. So if the user passes our validation, so the user is in the database and the user supplied the correct password, we will proceed and giving him the token. Now we will use JWT and the method sign. Now it has parameters right here. First one is an object. You can put the information that you want to have here. For me, I'm putting user ID and email. Now since we get the user earlier in the first part of this resolver, I will get the ID from the database and the email. Next parameter for the sign method is your secret key, and the last one is the options. For our options, I only used the expiry, so it expires in 1 hour. And for the last step, we will return the token to the client. So we have the user ID, the token that we get from GWT, and expiration we put 1, referring to 1 hour here. So that's basically how you would authenticate a user in GraphQL. Next up, we will talk about subscription. Now we have two screens here for the schema and for the resolver. Let's go first to the schema. We have two new things here: subscription and mutation. But let's focus on this one right here. Type subscription, just a field called new user with user info as data type. Now I forgot to add user info in our types here, but you can just go ahead and create an object which is an info, which whatever you want to include in the user info.
Now for our resolver, we added a subscription resolver that returns an async iterator. It will listen to the events asynchronously. To generate the events in the example, we notified the pub sub implementation inside our mutation resolver with the method publish. Now I'm cutting this video short. We still have more topics to talk about, but I'll just create a short follow-up video for this one. And that's it for our video. Thanks for watching, and I'm done.